Ginnivan looking out on his favourite left leggy. Peter Bennett running straight down the corridor. Chance. Have we got a game for you?
And welcome to viewers right around Australia for the coverage of this year's SANFL Grand Final between the two leading sides here in South Australia, the reigning premiers Port Adelaide and the minor premiers North Adelaide. A capacity crowd, a sellout of 50,000 at Football Park. The atmosphere is great, and the sellout occurred before the major round, so that just gives you some indication as to the interest of football here in Adelaide. Well, Port Adelaide, coached by John Cale, they're aiming for consecutive premierships. They won the flag last year, and now let's see how the Magpies reach this year's Grand Final.
After finishing second on the premiership table at the end of the minor round with 18 wins, Port Adelaide faced Central District in the qualifying final. A crowd of 21,000 saw the Bulldogs at their fiery best for just over 2 quarters, thanks mainly to the efforts of former Swans ruck rover Greg Smith.
He really is starring in this first quarter. Back it goes to...
Wingman Stephen Schwert was also causing havoc.
And goes wide, looking for Schwert. Oh, good mark,
And
Schwert.
Central captain Peter Krieg was working brilliantly. Central led by 13 points at the long break, but halfway through the third quarter, the Magpies switched on.
Looking for Hodges. Oh, magnificent. Chipping in as Williams. Goal.
And piled on 7 goals to 1 in the last 12 minutes of the term. The key focal point was the athletic forward, Scott Hodges.
Straight through. Another goal.
The last quarter was much of the same, with the Magpies continuing to humiliate. Last year's premiers blasted the Bulldogs off the oval by a massive 85 points. Port Adelaide's next challenge was against minor premiers North Adelaide in the second semi-final a week later. The match, which started at a furious rate, attracted 31,000, and they weren't disappointed.
The ball Tiller and Darryl Hart. What a return to the side.
North Adelaide captain Darryl Hart, who had just returned from injury, started things off sensationally. But the Magpies steadied, and late in the first quarter, wingman David Hutton goaled, helping the side to a 9-point lead at the break. North coach Mike Noonan immediately made some moves. Peter Bennett to full forward was an instant success. By half-time, North Adelaide led by 9 points, but the time had come for Magpie coach John Cale to move former Brisbane Bears player Stephen Williams from the centre to a half-forward flank. The result was match-winning.
No breeze to worry about.
The unmistakable Rowan Smith chipped in as well, and at three-quarter time, the Magpies led by 16 points. They kept up the pressure in the final 30 minutes of the match with goals from dynamic 18-year-old wingman Simon Tregenza, forward David Hines, and captain and former Collingwood star Russell Johnston. The Magpies were home by 23 points and moved into their 51st grand final, but more significantly, the club's 7th in 11 seasons under John Cale.
As John Cale leads the field, absolutely excited and delighted.
And as a coach and a player, John Cale's almost been an institution at Port Adelaide. In his 11-year coaching reign at the Magpies, he's taken the club to 7 grand finals and for a total of 5 premierships, an outstanding record from the former champion wingman.
After a sensational career as a player for Port Adelaide, John Cale began his coaching career with the Magpies in 1974. In 9 years, he took the club to 4 premierships, including 3 in a row from 1979. Russell Ebert, another Port Adelaide champion, took over for the next 5 years without success. And after coaching stints with West Adelaide and VFL club Collingwood, Cale was again back at Alberton. The results were immediate. The 1988 premiership over Glenelg. Cale's success has ensured he always sets high goals and expects results.
I think that's what drives a lot of people on, is the fear of failure, be it in business or be it in sport. I love to achieve and I love to be a winner, but if I lose, well, then I'll take it on the chin, and we've lost because we're not good enough on that day, and so you must accept your losses with dignity and grace.
The last time Port and North met was in the second semi-final. The Magpies won by 23 points. Cale says everything is now set in place.
We've had the week's break, which will freshen a lot of our players up. We also have the tackling. I think at Port Adelaide, the tackling and the unselfish teamwork are 2 fortes.
And we're about 15 minutes away from the opening bounce. A great atmosphere at Football Park. The Pembroke Choir in the background setting the scenes for what should be a great contest between, as I said, the two leading sides in South Australia, Port Adelaide and North Adelaide. Well, in contrast to Port, North had a pretty tough run into the grand final. They defeated Norwood in last week's preliminary final, but that didn't overly perturb coach Michael Noonan the 5-day break.
The Roosters started the preliminary final against Norwood in furious fashion. The Redlegs failed to score in the first quarter and a half, while North Adelaide attacked the goals with confidence.
Thomas taken down, the kick off the ground is magnificent.
Champion centreman Darren Jarman had 12 possessions and was instrumental in setting up a 43-point lead at the first break. North was 6-7. Norwood hadn't scored.
For North Adelaide, from the right forward pocket. Don't tell me he's kicked this. That is sensational football by Darren Jarman.
In fact, the Redlegs didn't post a major until halfway through the second term, when youngster Andrew Pascoe received a free kick.
A good one towards centre-half forward. Arnold is there. Pascoe's with him. Into his back. Pascoe's kick is on its way. The umpire has a good look. Norwood get there first.
Then a controversial incident. North rover Stephen Sims cleaned up Norwood defender Justin Scanlon. Sims was later reported by an umpire's observer in the crowd, but was cleared of a charge of striking. Scanlon still has a headache. Spurred on by the incident, the Redlegs kicked 3 late goals in the second term to trail by 28 points.
The roar from the crowd as McIntosh runs into an open goal and has got it.
The third quarter realised 11 goals, 5 from Norwood and 6 from North Adelaide. The margin was still 36 points, but Norwood had a chance. That was until this happened just 28 seconds into the last quarter.
Payne in pursuit, and Darren Jarman does it with ease. Oh, what a way to open the final term.
And when Hart and Bennett nailed 2 more,
Pass to his captain, and Hart has a shot at the goal. Look at that for a kick.
the preliminary final was over, and North Adelaide had reached its 4th final under coach Mike Noonan.
And under Mike Noonan, North Adelaide have certainly grown in stature. They've been blessed by some wonderfully talented players of recent times, and he's in line for his 2nd grand final. Of course, the Roosters winning back in '87. Mark Aston has a look at Mike Noonan's reign at North Adelaide.
When Mike Noonan took over at North Adelaide in 1981, the club was at rock bottom. The Roosters had won their last premiership in 1972, but since then had dropped to 10th in 1978. In Noonan's 9 years with the club, he's taken it to 4 grand finals for 1 premiership against Glenelg in 1987.
Deepest respect to the 20 boys that have represented a club and stood for something today, and they've created the future for themselves.
Noonan says a lot of egos were hurt when he took over, but points out that changes had to be made if the club was to turn the corner and become successful. Noonan, who lives for football and the ongoing challenges associated with it, concedes he's not the most popular person around.
I don't go about the job of coaching for love or for hatred. I go about the job of coaching of trying to find what motivates, what is that particular stimulus for the individual that produces their best. If they hate me, well, so be it.
Like all coaches, Noonan advocates the power of positive thinking. He leads by example and is constantly coming up with new ideas. But Noonan, who rarely concedes any personal weaknesses, says there are times of self-doubt.
You'd be totally arrogant if you didn't suggest that, that you could be wrong at various times, and therefore you have to go through that period of self-assessment.
But there's no reassessing the situation today. Noonan says if his side performs as well as it did in last Sunday's preliminary final against Norwood, the Roosters will defeat the Magpies in the grand final.
Does it with ease.
Well, the two sides, Port and North, have met on 4 occasions this year. The head-to-head clashes 2-2, and here's hoping that's indicative of a great contest today. And joining us in commentary today, Jerry Harrison, Mark Haston and Daryl Hickson. Jerry, they often say whoever wins the centre square is well on the way to win the footy match. It should be a great contest between Redden and Johnston in the ruck.
A very significant one, David. In the second semi-final, when Russell Johnston curved Big Mick Redden, it gave Port Adelaide at least the opportunity to get into the game, and if he can stop him getting it down to the engine room, as Mike Noonan calls the Darren Jarman and then.
I think skill tends to overcome most of the conditions, but very, very difficult if you kick against the breeze in the first term.
So the Port Adelaide lineup is very strong, and of course perhaps one of the strongest lines is the centre line. Hutton, Williams and Tregenza. They've had an outstanding season, the three of them.
Particularly Tregenza on centre wing, second in the Magarey medal. But I think the Port Adelaide defence, with Greg Williams beginning the rebound, bringing other teammates into the game, certainly helps the Magpies' cause.
What about the forward line, Jerry, of Smith, Hodges and, of course, Hines?
Well, Hodges has been a player that's out of form. Last year, he was a winner, without doubt, in the grand final. I tipped whoever were the goal kickers last year would win the game, and Hodges got 4, but he has been sadly out of form in recent weeks.
Jack Cale, he's had an outstanding coaching career with Port Adelaide, and he really would be hoping, obviously, to try and notch up his 6th premiership with the club. It has been an outstanding performance by Cale, and of course Russell Johnston, the captain, who didn't play last year, Darryl, and due to suspension he'd be pleased to be playing today.
Well, it's a real spur to miss a grand final. They used him, of course, last year as part of their pre-match build-up. You know, John O, the Eels of Port Adelaide, the chip on the shoulder, it certainly motivated them. But I think North Adelaide also, though, missed the final 5 last year, and they were spurred on in season 89.
Well, in addition last year, Darryl, they also had the mission at the start of the year when the sacking of Ebert took place and Port Adelaide set themselves a mission. I think this year North Adelaide are the side with the mission. Noonan was terribly disappointed with last year's effort, and they got out of the blocks very, very quickly in the early part of the season, which is not usual for a North Adelaide side.
Well, they trained much earlier. They were into training in November, and so they've almost had a 12-month preparation for this game.
So there's the North Adelaide lineup. Mike Redden, well, he's had a fantastic year, and as David Bashir mentioned, Jerry, his duel with Russell Johnston will be critical, and of course the engine room for North Adelaide is critical as well.
That's right. It's the quick hands, without any doubt, of the Jarman brothers, Darryl Hart, the Sanders, Craig, all those that are very, very quick reflexes, making the ball move quickly, not so much the pace of the legs. And John Cale was quite outspoken after the second semi-final win, in that North Adelaide were the old brigade, and coach Michael Noonan was very quick to react to that, and Darryl Hart likewise has whipped his players up against that particular theme.
So the atmosphere is really building here as Michael Abbott and Laurie Argent come onto the arena here at Football Park in front of 50,000 fans, the two umpires. Bit of difference in experience there, Darryl. Michael Abbott, his 2nd grand final. On the other hand, Laurie Argent's umpired in 5. I spoke to him yesterday. He was the more nervous of the two.
Is that true? Well, Michael Abbott did very well last year in his first. And Laurie, of course, he umpired the big interstate clash on the MCG. And he is the most experienced and perhaps the best performed umpire in South Australia in season 89.
Well, that roar from the crowd indicates that Port Adelaide is on the field. And as they run through the banner, and I'm amazed how those young fellas and young ladies can hold that banner up with all of the wind. And you get an indication in a minute just as to how windy it is as to the balloons. And have a look at them go. It is really gusting in the middle of Football Park. But a great atmosphere as Port Adelaide comes onto the field.
And is that a prophetic statement? We've laid the foundation for back-to-back premierships, and they're obviously very keen to go.
And also a pun, I would say, Darryl. The Foundation Cup at the start of the year finished with black and white back-to-back in 1989. And what a way to end the era, starting the era with back-to-back premierships and finishing it likewise.
There's no doubt that John Cale has been a tremendous influence in a decade of football for Port Adelaide, and the balloons are showing here at Football Park that it's turbulent air, and it's going to be a day for skill and perhaps a little bit of luck in kicking for goal.
Former North Adelaide star John Robinson is lucky enough to be down on the boundary line. What's it like down there, John?
Well, excitement personified down here, Mark. You can hear the noise of the crowd in the background. I hope you can hear me. But you mentioned the weather. At the moment we're bathed in sunshine, which is great. But the weather seems to be coming from the west, behind the members' stand. You can see a big cloud of overcast sky moving away towards the city. The clear sky is on its way, but that wind is very, very strong. It's blowing over the stand, making it swirly conditions, as Darryl has just mentioned. But it appears as though it's blowing towards the western side of the ground, or sorry, towards the city from the west, and I would believe that this grandstand side will be the side to attack from, but of course it does swirl once it comes over the stand. But yes, Mark, the excitement down here is enormous. The colour is great. I'm looking forward to what should be a magic game of football.
Thank you, John. We'll be crossing down to John throughout the game for injuries and also half-time interviews. Well, a tremendous atmosphere here as North Adelaide ran out onto the field, Jerry. Not quite as big a
The pivot, and his form throughout the year has been particularly good. He was out with injury for the last 4 minor round games, and Port Adelaide showed that they really need his services to be setting the motion away from the centre.
What about Darren Smith, number 28? He's had a very good season. Of course, he has had problems with injury, though, Jerry. A very...
And I'm sure they will. That'll be ringing in their ears.
But when it gets down to the nitty-gritty, the North Adelaide defence had less points kicked against it in 89 than any other team in the competition.
So it is underway. And Johnston in quickly, but it was Redden's tap, and Johnston gets the first free kick. Interesting, as Obbs sends Port Adelaide through half-forward. Hodges! Oh, great start for the Magpies. A well-placed kick to find the full forward.
What a lead. In front of the eyes, he took the ball. The heart will be pounding. An exceptionally important kick for Scotty Hodges.
Scott Hodges, the full forward. Oh, looks good. Great kick for the Magpies. 33 seconds into the game, and they lead by 6 points.
Not often you get a chance for your full forward to get the first touch.